The wind whispered low across the pines, threading through the branches like a ghost in search of rest. Rain clung to the twilight like a second skin, soft but relentless, soaking the forest floor and hushing the world beneath a veil of mist. On the edge of a winding road near the sleepy mountain town of Whistler Creek, a single truck cut through the gloom, its headlights golden beacons in the gathering dark. Inside, Jonah Wells rubbed his eyes, fatigue weighing down his every movement. He had just finished a 12-hour shift at the town's only garage, grease still clinging to the creases of his knuckles and the collar of his work shirt. His old Chevy rumbled along, stubborn against the slippery bends of the forest road. He wasn't in a hurry. Nothing in Whistler Creek ever was. Then he saw it. A flash of white on the side of the road. Not snow, it was too early in the season. Not trash, too smooth, too delicate. He eased his foot onto the brake. The truck groaned to a stop as he squinted through the windshield. The shape hadn't moved. Jonah shoved the gear into park and stepped out, boots splashing into a puddle that had formed in the gravel. The woods were unnervingly still, the rain soft but persistent. He jogged the few yards toward the edge of the ditch, his breath catching when the white form took shape, a woman. She was crumpled against the underbrush, half covered in wet leaves and pine needles. Her dress was once pristine, now torn and soaked through, clinging to her like a second skin. The kind of dress you wore to a wedding. Jonah dropped to his knees beside her, fingers trembling as he reached to check her pulse. Still beating. Weak, but steady. "Hey," he said, voice gentle but urgent. "Can you hear me? You're gonna be okay. Just hang on." There was blood on her temple. A gash, already clotted but still angry and red. Her bare feet were scratched and cold to the touch, her skin pale and clammy beneath the faint yellow of his truck's headlights. She looked fragile, like a porcelain figure left too long in the rain. Jonah's hands moved on instinct. He'd volunteered with the local search and rescue squad years ago, long before his father's heart attack pulled him back home for good. He rushed to the back of his truck, grabbed his emergency kit, and returned to her side. With practiced calm, he cleaned the cut, wrapped her head gently in gauze, and covered her with his own flannel jacket. "You're safe now," he whispered. She didn't stir, but a soft breath escaped her lips, shallow, but steady. Gently, he lifted her in his arms. She was light, all bones and silence. He placed her on the passenger seat, propped her leg on a folded blanket, and slammed the door before jogging around to the driver's side. As he drove, his eyes kept flicking toward her. Her face was too elegant to belong to this town. High cheekbones. Delicate hands. Something about her posture, even unconscious, spoke of a life unfamiliar with struggle. She didn't belong here. Not in Whistler Creek. And definitely not lying half dead in the forest. It wasn't until he reached the hospital that he noticed the bracelet. Gold. Slim. Engraved with a strange symbol, some kind of curling vine or serpent wrapped around a flower. Not a brand logo. Not anything he'd seen in the catalogs his mother used to read. It looked custom. Ancient. Personal. He slammed on the horn as he pulled up to the emergency entrance. "I need help," he shouted as nurses rushed outside. "She's hurt bad. Found her off Route 8, near Hollow Bend. Looks like she might have fallen, or worse." They moved fast, voices low and professional, lifting her onto a stretcher and wheeling her inside. Jonah followed them until the doors to the trauma unit swung closed in his face. Then he stood there, soaked from the rain, heart pounding as the weight of what he had just stumbled into finally began to settle in. Who was she? What was she doing in a wedding dress, alone in the woods, bleeding and unconscious? And what in God's name had she been running from? The waiting room was empty, save for the flicker of a TV in the corner and the rhythmic squeak of a janitor's mop. Jonah sat in one of the cracked plastic chairs, his jacket draped across his lap, hands still damp and stained with engine oil and someone else's blood. Hours passed. A nurse finally approached, middle-aged, kind eyes, clipboard in hand. "She's stable," she said. "Concussion. Deep laceration. Dislocated ankle. But she's going to make it." Jonah stood, hopeful. "Did she wake up? Say anything?" "She's confused," the nurse replied gently. "No ID. No phone. No name. She said a few things, nonsense, mostly. Chase. Cliff. Wedding. Then she went under again." Jonah frowned. "Wedding?" The nurse nodded. "It's possible she's dealing with trauma-induced memory loss. We'll keep monitoring her. But she doesn't appear to be in danger to herself or others. We're understaffed this week. If you're willing to stay close, just in case." Jonah hesitated. But only for a second. "I'll stay," he said. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the way her lips had moved in sleep. Maybe it was the haunted look in her eyes. Or maybe it was just the gut-deep certainty that she hadn't ended up in the ditch by accident. When she finally woke, sometime just before dawn, Jonah was there. She blinked against the fluorescent lights, eyes glassy with pain and confusion. "Hey," Jonah said softly, standing beside her bed. "You're safe. You're in Whistler Creek Memorial. I found you by the road." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know who I am." "That's okay," Jonah said. "You've got time. No rush." She looked down at her wrist, where the gold bracelet still clung like a secret. A small tattoo peeked out just beneath it, a lily, delicate and curling. "How about Lily?" Jonah said gently. "Until you remember your real name." She met his eyes. A flicker of warmth passed between them. "Fragile, but real." "Okay," she whispered. "Lily." The rain had stopped by the time they left the hospital. The clouds, though reluctant, had given way to scattered rays of afternoon light that fell between the pines like hesitant blessings. Jonah adjusted the passenger seatbelt gently over Lily's shoulder, careful not to jostle her bandaged ankle. She was still pale, still worn, but more alert now, her eyes tracing the passing trees like she was trying to memorize something she should already know. Jonah's cabin sat just outside the town limits, nestled between a pine grove and a shallow creek that babbled softly even in dry seasons. It wasn't much, one story, wood-paneled, with an old wood stove and crooked porch steps, but it was home. And for now, it was hers too. Lily's first steps inside were hesitant, like she was afraid of breaking something invisible. "You can rest in the guest room," Jonah said, carrying her small hospital bag and guiding her gently. "It's not fancy, but it's quiet." She nodded, her fingers brushing along the doorway like she was testing reality. He helped her settle in, propping up her ankle on a pillow and handing her a warm blanket. The silence between them was thick, not uncomfortable, but fragile. Like both of them were trying not to wake whatever ghosts still lingered. Jonah went into the kitchen and made soup. Real soup, not from a can. He didn't know why he went the extra mile. He barely cooked for himself, but something about the way Lily had looked at him, as if she wasn't sure if this was kindness or a trap, made him want to prove something. When he returned with the tray, she was sitting up, staring at the notebook he'd left on the bedside table. Blank pages, leather-bound. A gift from a customer that Jonah had never had much use for. "I thought you might want to write things down," he said, handing her the soup. "Even if it's just dreams. Could help." She smiled weakly, accepting the bowl. "Thank you." They didn't speak much that evening. But when Jonah passed her door before bed, he saw the light still on and the scratch of pen against paper. The days began to fall into a rhythm. Mornings were quiet. Jonah would make coffee, toast, sometimes pancakes if the mood struck. Lily would sit by the window with a blanket around her shoulders, her eyes searching the trees like they might whisper secrets back to her. Her ankle began to heal, slowly. The bruises on her arms faded, but something in her spirit still trembled at sudden noises, at the distant hum of an engine passing too slowly outside. The doctors had called it trauma response. Jonah didn't argue. They walked through recovery at her pace. He didn't ask too many questions. He just listened. In the evenings, he'd read out loud sometimes. Whatever he was working through, old novels, mechanic manuals, local folklore. Lily found comfort in his voice. Not because it was poetic, but because it was steady. Unshaken. And in a world where her identity felt like sand slipping through her fingers, that steadiness was a lifeline. Then the dreams began. They started quietly, whimpers in the dark, murmurs of names she didn't yet recognize. But by the third night, they had become full-on night terrors. Jonah heard the scream and was at her door in seconds. She was thrashing under the blankets, arms flailing as she cried out, "No. Don't make me, please," he said. "I had to, I don't want to." He rushed to her side. "Lily. Wake up, it's just a dream, you're safe now." Her eyes snapped open, wide and terrified, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked at him like she didn't recognize him for a moment. Then her expression softened. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "No need," Jonah replied, pulling a chair closer to her bed. "You remembered something, didn't you?" She nodded slowly, tears still running down her cheeks. "There was a man. Cold, expressionless. He said I had to marry him. That my family owed him something." Jonah's face hardened. "And I remember a woman. Older. Not afraid, just controlling. She kept calling me naive. Said I was being foolish for trying to leave." "Your mother?" Lily's lips trembled. "I think so." They sat in silence for a moment. "I think I jumped," she said. "Out of a car. That's how I ended up in the woods. I was running." "You're not running anymore," Jonah said, his voice steady. "You're standing. And you're not alone." The memories came faster after that. In pieces, at first. A ballroom filled with strangers. The weight of a necklace clasped too tightly around her neck. A whispered threat in a hallway. The feeling of being bought. She shared each one with Jonah, scribbling them down in the notebook when she couldn't say them aloud. He never pushed. He just handed her the pen, the tea, the quiet space. One morning, she walked out of the guest room wearing one of Jonah's old flannel shirts, her ankle lightly braced but no longer swollen. "Can we go into town today?" she asked. He blinked, surprised. "Yeah. Of course." They drove slow. She kept her sunglasses on, even though it was cloudy. She flinched once when a truck engine backfired near the hardware store, but otherwise, she held herself with a kind of quiet strength. Jonah introduced her to some of the locals, without explaining much. No one asked. Whistler Creek had always been the kind of place where people respected silence. At the town square, they visited the flea market. Lily wandered between stalls of hand-sewn quilts and vintage tools, her fingers trailing across rusted lanterns and worn leather books. Then she froze. It was a truck. Not Jonah's, but part of a vintage auto display. Parked behind a stall with its hood open, it bore a faded sticker on the door, a serpent coiled around a flower. Her breath hitched. "Lily?" Jonah called. But she didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the logo, her lips parted. Then came the flood. Memories surged forward, trees whipping past a car window, hands tied, the same symbol glowing faintly on the dash. A voice, "You don't run from this. You belong to him now." She stumbled back, knees buckling. Jonah caught her just before she hit the ground. "He found me," she gasped. "They were taking me to marry someone. Against my will. I jumped out. That's how I got here." Jonah helped her to the truck, shielding her from curious eyes. He didn't speak, not yet. She needed space to breathe. Back at the cabin, he made her tea. She sat at the table, fingers trembling around the mug. "You weren't just lost," Jonah said gently. "You were escaping something dark." She nodded. "They'll come looking." "Let them," he said. "They won't find you alone." For the first time, she reached across the table and took his hand. "Thank you," she whispered. And in that moment, under the soft hum of the porch light and the smell of pine needles, Jonah knew something had changed. She wasn't a ghost anymore. She was someone becoming whole. It was well past midnight, but Jonah couldn't sleep. The glow from his laptop cast a faint blue light across the wooden kitchen walls as he scrolled through websites and news articles. A steaming mug of coffee sat untouched beside him, its warmth long since faded. He hadn't told Lily, at least not yet, but after what happened at the market, he couldn't ignore the feeling that they were running out of time. She'd seen that symbol, the serpent and the flower, and collapsed like the ground had been ripped out from under her. Something was coming. Or someone. He rubbed his tired eyes and typed into the search bar again, "Serpent Flower Family Crest." For a while, nothing. Then, click. A photograph from a high society gala. New York. A backdrop lined with golden crests, one of them unmistakable, the serpent wrapped around a blooming flower. He clicked through faster now, scanning captions, headlines. Then he saw her. Hair styled into soft waves. A pale blue gown that shimmered under the lights. A smile as perfect as porcelain, and as hollow. But the eyes. He would have known those eyes anywhere. The article headline made his stomach twist. Amelia Richmond vanishes hours before multi-million-dollar wedding. He leaned closer, heart pounding. Daughter of Charles and Eleanor Richmond, heir to the Richmond financial dynasty, was set to marry Henry Vail, CEO of Vail Enterprises, in what was considered the social union of the year. The ceremony was cancelled when Amelia reportedly disappeared without a trace. Officials suspect she may have run away, though no statement has been issued by the Richmond family. Jonah sat back in his chair, stunned. Lily wasn't just someone important, she was the Amelia Richmond. Heiress. Socialite. The woman at the center of a quiet scandal too delicately managed to make national news. But she hadn't just run away from a wedding. She'd escaped captivity. He printed the article and slid it into the notebook they had been filling with her memories. When she woke, she needed to see it, with him, not from a stranger, not on a screen. The next morning, the sun filtered through the pine trees, soft and golden. Lily came into the kitchen wearing one of Jonah's hoodies, her hair tied back and her expression lighter than he'd seen in days. Her ankle was healing. She moved slowly but with purpose, like someone beginning to feel their own shape again. "You look like you didn't sleep," she said as she poured herself some tea. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened the notebook and handed her the folded article. "What's this?" "Just take your time," he said. She sat down at the table, unwrapping the paper slowly. The first thing she saw was the photo. Her breath caught. She stared at it for a long time before reading the headline. Then the article. Her fingers trembled. Her lips parted but no sound came out. Finally, she pushed the page away and looked up. "That's me," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I remember now." Jonah waited, giving her space. "My name is Amelia Richmond. My parents. They were going bankrupt. Bad investments. Wrong deals. Henry Vale offered to save us, but only if I married him. It was never about love. It was a transaction. I was the asset." Her hands clenched. "I begged my mother. I told her I didn't want it. But she said I owed the family. That this was my role." Jonah's jaw tightened. "They were selling you." She nodded, staring at the floor. "The night before the wedding, I tried to run. I packed a bag, had everything ready. But someone must have told them. Henry's men found me first. They grabbed me, threw me into a car, and told me they were taking me to a private estate to finish the wedding in secret." Her eyes glistened with tears. "There was a sharp turn on the road. I unlocked the door and jumped. I don't remember hitting the ground, just cold. And trees." Jonah reached out, his hand steady on hers. "That's when I found you," he said softly. "You were already fighting." She gave a small, sad smile. "I just didn't know if I'd won." Over the next few days, Amelia and Jonah began preparing, not to run, but to stand. She insisted on using her real name now. It was a reclamation, not a surrender. They contacted a lawyer, one from outside the city, someone Jonah knew through a former customer who'd once fought a land rights case. Discreet. Honest. The lawyer confirmed their suspicions. Henry Vale was not just powerful, but deeply connected. The Richmond family had kept things quiet, but Henry had ties to private security firms, influence in local law enforcement, and a history of untraceable coercion. If Amelia went public, she'd need proof. A story alone wouldn't be enough. "I have something," she said one evening, pacing the porch. "My old bracelet. The one with the engraving. I remember now, it was a custom design from Vale's company. A gift. I hated it. But I kept it. It has a tracker built in." Jonah stared. "A what?" She nodded. "It's why they found me that first time. I forgot I was still wearing it. We can use it now. Let them track me. But this time, I'll be waiting." 3 days later, they drove into the city. The contrast was jarring. Glass towers. Sculpted hedges. People who measured time in schedules and strategy. Amelia wore simple clothes, neutral colors, no makeup, hair down. She didn't want to look like the woman she used to be. Because she wasn't. They pulled up to the Richmond estate. Jonah waited just beyond the gate while Amelia stepped out. Her old butler opened the door, eyes wide. "Miss Richmond? Tell my mother and Henry the first I'm here," she said. She walked into the drawing room like a soldier entering enemy territory. Eleanor Richmond sat straight-backed in a velvet armchair, her fingers coiled around a teacup like claws. Henry Vale stood beside the fireplace, hands in his pockets, smugness carved into every line of his face. "You've caused quite the mess," Eleanor snapped. "Do you know what you've cost this family?" "I know exactly what it cost," Amelia said calmly. "And I'm done paying for it." Henry chuckled. "You think walking back in here gives you leverage?" "No," she said. "I didn't come for leverage. I came to tell you, face to face, I'm not your property. Not yours, not his." Her mother's voice rose. "Do not be foolish, Amelia. Walk away from this and you walk away from everything." "Good," Amelia said. "Then I'll finally have something that's mine." She turned to leave. Henry stepped forward. "You think that mechanic can protect you? You'll be nothing without this family." She paused. "Then I'll be nothing. And I'll still be more than either of you." She walked out. Head high. Steps steady. Jonah was waiting by the car, engine idling. When she climbed in, he looked at her with quiet awe. "How'd it go?" She let out a long breath. "It's over. I walked out. And I didn't look back." Jonah smiled. "Then let's look forward." And they drove away, not from fear, but toward a life they would finally get to choose together. Whistler Creek welcomed Amelia back like she had never left. The town didn't need explanations. Its people had known quiet storms before, the kind that didn't come with thunder, just a tired voice, a long look, and someone walking a little slower than usual. After returning from the city, Amelia didn't speak much of what had happened in that grand estate. She didn't have to. The way she moved told the story, her shoulders looser, her smile softer, her laugh returning, tentative, but real. It was early autumn now. Leaves browned at the edges and fell gently from trees. The mornings arrived cool and misty, and by afternoon the hills glowed golden under a warm sun. Gavin's old Chevy now shared a driveway with a bicycle Amelia had picked out at the flea market. She liked riding into town alone sometimes, scarf tucked under her chin, the wind in her hair. It was the kind of freedom that still felt unfamiliar, like something borrowed, but each time she pedaled back to the cabin, it felt more like hers. Jonah, for his part, was changing too. He'd worked for years fixing other people's engines, other people's problems. But now, with Amelia by his side, he started thinking about what he wanted. What they could build. It began with sketches on napkins, drawings of a small garage, with space for teaching teens how to work on engines, a corner for old classics in need of resurrection, maybe even a coffee machine that didn't wheeze. Monroe Auto and Repair, Amelia had written neatly across the top of the sketch, adding a little oak leaf beneath it. Because you always build things that last. He couldn't stop smiling for an hour after that. They spent their mornings fixing what they could around the cabin, afternoons walking the dog they'd unofficially adopted from the local shelter, a mutt named Pickle, and evenings sitting on the porch swing, wrapped in blankets, sipping cocoa while fireflies blinked across the meadow. No headlines. No secret meetings. No security details. Just life. Quiet. Honest. Free. Amelia found a rhythm she didn't know she'd craved. She started baking again, not from necessity, but because she loved it. It began with simple biscuits and scones, but word traveled fast in a town like Whistler Creek. Soon, people were knocking gently on their door, asking if she took special orders. "I'm not a professional," she'd say, laughing, flour on her cheek. "Just the best we've ever tasted," they'd reply. That's when Jonah had an idea. "What if," he said one evening, "you opened a cafe?" She looked at him, half laughing. "A what?" "Not big. Just something small. Yours. Your name on the sign. You bake. I fix. 2 quiet places for people who want something real." Amelia stared into her mug, thinking. What would I even call it? Jonah leaned in, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. "Lily and Oak." Her eyes sparkled. "Lily for? You. Who you were? And who you chose to become." She kissed him right there on the porch, the wind tangling in their hair. It took them months to bring it to life, but they did it brick by brick. The cafe opened that spring, tucked on the corner of Main Street. Ivy curled around its sign. Inside, sunlight streamed through wide windows, and the air always smelled like cinnamon, lemon, or something warm. The walls held shelves of books, vintage mugs, and quiet music playing from an old speaker near the register. Locals came in droves. First out of curiosity. Then out of loyalty. They didn't ask for Amelia's past. They just asked for seconds. Across the street, Monroe Auto and Repair opened its doors too. Jonah wore his name on the sign like a quiet declaration. This was his now, his legacy. He started free weekend workshops for high school students, many of whom had never held a wrench. Parents dropped off their kids with hesitant trust. They always picked them up smiling. Amelia would sometimes walk across with a basket of cookies, pausing at the edge of the lot to watch Jonah in his element, elbows deep in an engine, grease on his brow, explaining carburetors like ancient magic. He'd look up, catch her eye, and wink. And her heart would flutter like it was the first time all over again. But even peace has shadows. It started with a strange phone call to the cafe. The line went dead when she answered. Then Jonah noticed a black SUV parked across from the hardware store, windows tinted, engine humming but never moving. The past, it seemed, hadn't quite let go. One night, after closing, Amelia sat on the cafe steps, her fingers wrapped tightly around a cup of chamomile tea. Jonah stood nearby, watching the horizon. "You think they'll come back?" she asked softly. "I think they'll try," he replied. "But it won't matter." She looked at him, confusion and fear flickering in her eyes. "Because this time," he said, sitting beside her, "we're not hiding. We've got names now. Faces. This town knows you. Loves you. You're not some secret they can bury." Her breath trembled. "What if they take you to get to me?" "They won't," he said. "And if they try, they'll find out real fast who they're messing with." Amelia smiled, small but true. "You sound like a Hallmark movie." He smirked. "That's because I've got the leading lady right here." They laughed together, then sat in silence as the sun dipped behind the hills. The threats never fully disappeared, but they lost their sting. Whistler Creek stood between Amelia and the world that once tried to own her. The sheriff kept a quiet eye. Locals kept their ears open. Strangers didn't stay strangers long. More importantly, Amelia no longer trembled when the shadows moved. She stood taller now, her voice surer, her choices truly hers. She'd once been a pawn on someone else's board. Now, she was the one holding the pen. 1 year after they returned, the field behind the cafe bloomed with wildflowers. Folding chairs were set in rows. A wooden arch was wrapped in white ribbon and fresh lilies. Jonah stood beneath it, his shirt sleeves rolled, boots scuffed from years of work, but his smile brighter than ever. And then Amelia stepped out of the little cabin nearby. She wore the same wedding dress she had once run from, but this time, she walked freely, barefoot, daisies in her hair, her eyes locked on the only man she had ever truly chosen. The ceremony was brief. No headlines. No photographers. Just community. Just love. As they exchanged vows, Jonah held her hands and said, "You weren't just lost when I found you. I think I was too. But somewhere between the forest and this front porch, you became my compass." Amelia's voice shook, but she didn't falter. "With you," she said, "I became someone I didn't think I was allowed to be. And I don't want to go one more day without you beside me." They kissed. The crowd cheered. And fireflies danced as night fell. The years slipped by like sunlight on river water, soft, golden, impossible to hold. But Jonah and Amelia didn't try to hold time. They just lived it, one quiet moment at a time. Whistler Creek remained their sanctuary. The cafe, Lily and Oak, bloomed into more than a place for coffee and scones. It became a heartbeat of the town. Locals gathered in the mornings to share stories, travelers paused there and stayed longer than planned. The warmth wasn't just in the baked goods, it was in Amelia's smile, in the way she remembered names, in how she treated everyone like they mattered. Across the street, Monroe Auto and Repair thrived too. Jonah taught more than mechanics, he mentored, listened, encouraged. Some of the teens he guided now ran their own shops or studied engineering in the city. But they always came back. They always called him coach. Together, they created more than businesses. They created belonging. Their home, once just a cabin in the woods, became a gathering place. Bonfires in the backyard, stargazing on the roof, long conversations over soup and jazz records. Sometimes, Amelia would still wake from dreams, remnants of her old life, but she never woke up alone anymore. One morning, as autumn leaves swirled outside the window, Amelia placed a tiny pair of booties on the kitchen table. Jonah looked at them, then at her. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. He crossed the room in 3 steps and wrapped her in his arms, forehead resting against hers. "We're ready," he whispered. When their daughter, Elowen, was born the following spring, the entire town came to celebrate. She had Amelia's eyes and Jonah's easy grin. They raised her not in luxury, but in love. She grew up knowing how to knead bread, change a tire, and stand up for what mattered. Years later, when Elowen asked, "Mama, how did you and Papa fall in love?" Amelia smiled, pulled her close, and said, "It started with a storm. And a choice. And the kind of kindness that changes everything." Because that's what it had been all along, not just survival. Not just escape. But transformation. Freedom. A life lived not for appearances, but for truth. And every time the wind rustled the trees behind their home, Amelia would look out and remember the girl who once ran through those woods, afraid and alone. Then she'd look down at her daughter, at her husband laughing by the fire, and know she'd made it home.